In 476 AD, Rome collapsed. The most powerful empire in history, gone. In 1947, the British Empire fell apart. 105 years of global dominance ended. In 1991, the Soviet Union disintegrated in 69 days. 3 empires, 3 different centuries, 3 different ideologies, but the exact same 6-stage collapse pattern. And right now, in 2025, China is in stage 4, the stage where collapse becomes inevitable. This isn't prediction. This is pattern recognition, historical mathematics. And once you see how it works, you'll understand why China's dominance is already over, even though most people think they're just getting started. Let me show you the 6 stages, how they played out across 2,000 years of history, and why China is following the script exactly. Before we go through the 6 stages, you need to understand what makes an empire collapse. Not decline, collapse. Empires don't fade slowly, they break suddenly. The Roman Empire didn't gradually shrink over centuries. It functioned until it didn't. One day Rome had legions across Europe. 15 years later, barbarians were occupying the capital. The British Empire controlled a quarter of the world in 1939. By 1947, it was over. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons, satellites, and a superpower military in 1989. 2 years later, it didn't exist. Collapse happens fast because empires are systems, and systems don't decay, they break. When the load exceeds structural capacity, everything fails at once. This has happened 6 times in recorded history using the exact same sequence. Rome, the Mongol Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and now China. Let me show you the 6 stages and where China is right now. The first stage is military overextension. This is when an empire expands beyond its ability to control territory. Not just having a large military, spending so much on military that the economy can't sustain it. Let me show you the pattern. Rome reached this stage by 200 AD. At its peak, Rome controlled 5 million square kilometers, from Britain to Mesopotamia. The problem was defending it. Rome needed 30 legions. That's 150,000 professional soldiers, plus auxiliaries. The cost was 50% of the imperial budget. Half of all tax revenue went to the military, not infrastructure, not development, just maintaining borders against constant barbarian pressure. By 250 AD, Rome was paying soldiers in debased coins because they couldn't afford real silver. The military was bankrupting the empire, but they couldn't reduce it. The borders would collapse. This is the trap. You're trapped. Keep spending and go broke. Stop spending and lose territory. The British Empire hit the same stage after World War I. By 1920, Britain controlled 35 million square kilometers, a quarter of the world's land and population. The cost of defending this was unsustainable. The Royal Navy needed to be larger than the next 2 navies combined. Garrisons in India, Africa, the Middle East, Asia. Britain was spending 7% of GDP on military, even in peacetime. When World War II started, military spending hit 55% of GDP. The debt reached 250% of GDP by 1945. Britain won the war but lost the empire. They couldn't afford to keep it. India, the crown jewel, was costing more to control than it generated in revenue. Military overextension that becomes financially impossible. The Soviet Union entered this same trap in the 1980s. The USSR had 5 million active military personnel. Nuclear weapons, tanks, submarines, satellites. They were matching US military spending, despite having an economy 1/3 the size. By 1985, Soviet military spending was 15–20% of GDP. Some estimates say 25%. The civilian economy was starving. Factories couldn't get investment. Consumer goods were scarce, but they couldn't cut military spending. The entire legitimacy of the Soviet state was competing with the US. Reagan's military buildup in the 1980s forced the Soviets to spend even more. They couldn't keep up. The economy collapsed under the weight. Now let's look at China in 2025. China has the largest military in the world, 2 million active personnel. They're building aircraft carriers, 5th-generation fighters, hypersonic missiles. Military spending officially is $230 billion, but analysts believe real spending is $400–500 billion when you include hidden programs. That's 3–4% of GDP and rising. Here's the trap. China has territorial ambitions: Taiwan, South China Sea, India border. To achieve those goals, they need to match US military power in the Pacific. That means more carriers, more missiles, more bases. The US has 11 carrier groups. China has 3. To match the US, they'd need to triple military spending. But their economy is slowing. GDP growth has fallen from 10% to 5%, and real growth is probably 2 to 3%. They can't afford to triple military spending without collapsing the civilian economy. But if they don't, they lose credibility and territorial control. Military overextension is starting. They haven't collapsed yet, but the trap is set. Which brings us to the second stage: economic stagnation. This is when the empire's economy stops growing. Not recession, structural stagnation, where growth permanently slows because the system has exhausted its model. Rome hit this stage around 250 AD. The Roman economy had been built on conquest. New territories brought slaves, gold, and tribute. But by 200 AD, expansion had stopped. No new conquests meant no new economic inputs. The economy stagnated. Agriculture couldn't improve because slavery prevented technological innovation. Why invent better plows when labor is free? Trade collapsed because barbarian raids made roads dangerous. Silver mines were depleted. The money supply shrank. Prices rose. By 270 AD, the economy was in permanent crisis. Inflation, debasement, taxation couldn't fix it. The growth model was broken. Britain entered this stage after 1918. The British economy had been built on manufacturing and empire. British factories produced textiles, steel, ships. Colonies provided raw materials and captive markets. But by 1920, this model was finished. The US and Germany had surpassed British manufacturing. British factories were outdated. The empire was becoming unprofitable. India cost more to administer than it generated. By 1945, Britain's GDP growth was near zero. The economy couldn't recover because the structural model, empire and manufacturing, was obsolete. Not a recession you recover from. A permanent end to growth. The Soviet Union hit this stage in the 1970s. Soviet GDP growth fell from 5% in the 1960s to 2% in the 1970s to negative by the late 1980s. The problem was structural. Central planning couldn't innovate. The economy was designed for heavy industry, steel, coal, tanks. But the global economy was shifting to technology, computers, services. The USSR couldn't adapt. Oil revenues masked the problem in the 1970s when prices were high. But when oil crashed in the 1980s, the economy had nothing left. Growth was over. China is entering this stage right now. Official GDP growth is 5%. Real growth is probably 2 to 3%. But here's the problem. China's growth model was exports and construction. Build infrastructure. Export cheap goods. Repeat. That model is exhausted. Export markets are saturated. The US and Europe are decoupling. Construction has hit limits. China has 90 million empty apartments. Ghost cities. They've built everything they can build. And the population is shrinking. China's working age population peaked in 2015. It's declining by 5 million per year. Fewer workers means less growth. Their model, cheap labor exports, is over. And they don't have a replacement. Consumer spending is weak. Technology is growing, but not fast enough. Structural stagnation is here. Growth is done. And when growth stops, empires move to the third stage: currency debasement and inflation. This is when the empire starts printing money or debasing currency to pay for military and government that the economy can't support. Inflation follows. Trust in currency collapses. Rome entered this stage around 250 AD. The Roman denarius was 95% silver in 200 AD. By 270 AD, it was 5% silver, 95% copper. The empire was melting down coins, reducing silver content, and reminting them. Why? They couldn't raise enough taxes to pay the army. So they debased the currency. Soldiers were paid in worthless coins. Prices exploded. A measure of wheat that cost 1 denarius in 200 AD cost 200 denarii by 301 AD. Inflation destroyed savings, trade, and trust. Emperor Diocletian tried price controls in 301 AD. They failed. You can't fix debasement with laws. The currency becomes worthless. Britain hit this stage after World War II. The pound was the world's reserve currency in 1914. By 1949, Britain devalued the pound by 30%. In 1967, another devaluation. Why? War debt was enormous. The economy couldn't generate enough to pay it, so they printed money. Inflation surged. The pound lost credibility. By 1976, Britain needed an IMF bailout. The currency that had ruled global finance for a century was collapsing. The Soviet Union experienced the same thing in the late 1980s. The ruble was officially strong, but nobody trusted it. Shortages were everywhere because the government printed rubles but didn't produce goods. By 1991, inflation was over 100%. The currency was worthless. People used dollars or barter. When the USSR collapsed, the ruble became toilet paper. Literally. Currency death. China is in the early phase of this stage right now. The yuan hasn't collapsed, but the warning signs are flashing. China's debt is 280% of GDP. Local governments owe $9 trillion. Property developers are bankrupt. Evergrande, Country Garden, collapsed. The government is bailing them out by printing money. The People's Bank of China has cut rates and injected liquidity repeatedly. This is the beginning of currency debasement, and capital flight is accelerating. Wealthy Chinese are moving money offshore. $50 billion per month is leaving China through Hong Kong, crypto, and fake invoices. When elites don't trust the currency, this stage is here. The yuan hasn't collapsed yet, but the process has started. But the most critical stage, the turning point, is stage 4. Loss of legitimacy. This is when the population stops believing the empire can deliver prosperity, security, or a better future. The social contract breaks. People stop cooperating. Elites fragment. This is where collapse becomes inevitable. Rome entered this stage in the 3rd century during the crisis of the 3rd century, 235–284 AD. In 50 years, Rome had 26 emperors. Most were assassinated. Provinces declared independence. The army stopped following orders. Why? The empire couldn't pay soldiers, couldn't defend borders, couldn't maintain order. People stopped believing Rome could protect them. Provinces started defending themselves. Warlords took over. The empire fragmented. Diocletian restored temporary order in 284 AD, but the legitimacy never fully recovered. People knew Rome was dying. Britain hit this stage after 1945. The Labour government promised a welfare state, NHS, housing, jobs, but the economy couldn't deliver. Rationing continued into the 1950s. Strikes paralyzed industries. In 1978–79, the winter of discontent. Garbage piled up in streets. The dead went unburied. People stopped believing the government could govern. When legitimacy dies, collapse accelerates. The empire dissolved. India independent in 1947, Africa by the 1960s. Within 20 years, the British Empire was gone. The Soviet Union lost legitimacy in the 1980s. Gorbachev tried reforms, glasnost and perestroika, but they revealed how broken the system was. People saw the corruption, the lies, the failure. In 1991, the August coup attempt failed because the military refused to shoot protesters. When the army won't defend the state, it's over. Yeltsin stood on a tank. The USSR dissolved within months. Loss of legitimacy triggers collapse. China is in this stage right now. Here's the evidence. Youth unemployment is 21%. The government stopped publishing the data because it's too damaging. The property market has collapsed. Middle-class savings are gone. People bought apartments as investments. Now they're worthless. Protests are increasing. In 2022, zero-COVID lockdowns triggered mass protests. People chanted, "Down with Xi Jinping." That's unprecedented. The CCP's legitimacy is based on delivering prosperity. If they can't, the contract is broken. And the elites know it. Xi has purged rivals. The military, the government. Everyone. Why? Because legitimacy is cracking. He's securing power before collapse. The population and elites are losing faith. China hasn't collapsed yet, but the turning point has passed. Collapse is now inevitable. Once legitimacy is lost, stage 5 begins. Internal fracture. This is when the empire breaks into competing factions. Regions assert independence. Elites fight for control. The center cannot hold. Rome entered this stage in the 3rd and 4th centuries. The empire split into West and East in 285 AD. By 400 AD, the Western Empire couldn't control provinces. Gaul, Spain, Britain all broke away or were overrun. Regional armies fought each other. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire was gone. The Eastern Empire, Byzantium, survived another 1,000 years, but the unified empire was finished. Britain fractured rapidly after 1945. India and Pakistan split in 1947, triggering mass violence and 1 million dead. Palestine became Israel, creating permanent Middle East conflict. Africa fragmented into dozens of states, many collapsing into civil war. The empire didn't end peacefully. It shattered into pieces, and many of those pieces are still broken today. The Soviet Union's fracture was fast. In 1991, republics declared independence. Ukraine, Baltic states, Central Asia. The military fragmented. Some units stayed loyal to Moscow, others sided with republics. The coup attempt in August 1991 failed because the military and KGB split. By December, the USSR was dissolved. 15 new countries. The fracture took 69 days. China hasn't hit this stage yet, but the fault lines are visible. Xinjiang, Uyghur separatism, Tibet, independence movements, Hong Kong, democracy protests crushed by force, Taiwan, which China claims but doesn't control, and regional inequality. Coastal cities are wealthy, interior provinces are poor. When the economy collapses and legitimacy is gone, these regions will pull apart. The CCP knows this. That's why surveillance is total. That's why military control is absolute. They're trying to prevent this stage, but history says they can't. Once stage 4 is complete, fracture follows. And then comes the final stage, collapse. This is the end. The empire ceases to exist as a unified political entity, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. But once internal fracture begins, collapse is certain. Rome's collapse was the fall of the Western Empire in 476 AD, when the last emperor was deposed. The Eastern Empire survived, but the unified Roman Empire was over. Britain's collapse was the dissolution of the empire from 1947 to 1970. Within 25 years, almost every colony was independent. The empire that controlled a quarter of the world was reduced to a European island. The Soviet Union's collapse was December 26, 1991. Gorbachev resigned. The Soviet flag came down from the Kremlin. The USSR ceased to exist. 74 years after the revolution, it was over. China's final collapse hasn't happened yet, but the pattern says it's coming. China is in stage 4 right now. Loss of legitimacy, youth unemployment, property collapse, capital flight. The CCP is tightening control because they see it coming. When stage 5 begins, when regions start pulling away, collapse follows fast. Could be 5 years, could be 10. But the sequence is locked in, the pattern is clear. 6 empires, 6 collapses, same 6-stage sequence. Military overextension, economic stagnation, currency debasement, loss of legitimacy, internal fracture, collapse. Rome took 300 years. Britain took 30. The Soviet Union took 10. China? We're about to find out. But they're in stage 4, and history says stage 5 and 6 come fast. Maybe they're different. Maybe they'll break the pattern. But Rome thought they were eternal. Britain thought the sun would never set. The Soviets thought communism was inevitable. And they were all wrong. The pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. It cares about mathematics. And the mathematics say China's empire is already over. They just don't know it yet. 3 empires collapsed. Same pattern, same sequence. China is in stage 4. If this changed how you see China, the global economy, and what's coming, subscribe. Because when stage 5 begins, when the fracture starts, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The pattern is clear, the timeline is evident, and the answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in 2,000 years of history.